this is a re-edit on my Bosch table saw review, and I'm changing it because people were getting grumpy with me of how I was using the saw. And yeah, the clips I chose weren't the best clips. My hands were kind of close, but also the camera angle was misleading. Anyway, I'm changing it because I'm tired of getting those comments, and I'm hoping to give you some better views of this saw chopping wood. Now, the few things you just saw me cutting, except for the plywood, it was just to demonstrate, because I don't always have my camera down here when I'm working, so I can't always film. And sometimes, like, I'm busy working, I'm not in the mood to be filming the saw chopping wood. So anyway, I'm gonna also add a little bit about what I think about safety table saw safety in. Now, this is by no means a table saw safety tip video. If you've never used a table saw before, then go ask someone who has used a table saw or watch one of those table saw tip videos. Although asking someone who has been using a table saw for years and years and years is going to be a lot better than watching a video by someone who has been using it for 6 minutes. Because like with all tools, part of the safety knowledge and how to use these tools comes from using it over time. So, yes. Anyway, the number one thing is you just gotta be careful with these saws. It's a saw, it cuts stuff. Like, if you put your fingers in that blade, it is gonna cut it. It is not gonna hesitate. It is not gonna ask you, would you like your fingers cut off? No, it's just gonna cut it. So if you're behaving like a ding-dong around this, or fooling around with it, yeah, you can definitely get hurt. But if you're using it, if you're aware of the safety precautions and you're using it carefully, this can actually be one of the more safer saws to use, if you ask me, because the blade is attached to the table, rather than like a circular saw where you're holding the saw and the blade is underneath. The blade is attached to the table. You do have a little bit of a guard there, although that guard is only going to be from going like this. You can still slide your hands in from the front. So what I do is, when you're pushing the wood in, is if you slip, where are your hands going to go? So if you're pushing wood in like this, and your hands slip, well, it's going to go this way. So that's fine. Like, your hands are on either side of the blade. That's kind of what I like to do, is never ever put your hand in the path of the blade, because if you slip, your hand's going to go right in. Obviously, with some stuff you can't help that, but for smaller pieces, the push stick is there, and that is a very useful thing for the smaller pieces. On bigger wood, it's not that safe, I find, because, like, if you have a great big piece of wood, you can definitely still use it, but it's sometimes better to just be actually holding the wood rather than using the push stick. But it is still great for small pieces, because you can get right up close to the blade and you don't have to worry about chopping your fingers off as much. So, that is handy. But really, I just, as long as your hands are on the side of the blade, like, I think even like having your hands here is somewhat acceptable, but it is still not ideal. So, also, if you're pushing the wood and the motor starts to really bog, or you hit it, you have to watch out for hitting knots or nails, and you also have to keep the wood straight, because if you bind it, it can definitely spit the wood out. And that is why with longer pieces, like longer than this, I prefer to go about halfway, then I go around the saw. A lot of people don't seem to like that, but that's what I do. And I pull the wood through instead, because that way, pulling the wood through, if it binds and it kicks back, you're on this side of the saw, and if you let go, the wood goes that way. Now, you shouldn't let go, and there really should be no reason to let go, but I think it's a little safer to be on the back side than the front side. And also, if you're cutting a 2-meter piece of wood, this is only like, how big is this table? I forget. Yeah, it's only about 55 centimeters. So if you're cutting a 2-meter piece of wood, when you have cut over a meter, now it's gonna be weighing on this side, and it's gonna want to lift up on the front. So I think it's better, and you definitely get a more precise result to just pull it through. Because you should have two people when you're doing that kind of stuff, but it rarely works out like that. Most of the time I'm working alone. So I think as long as you are just aware where your hands are and where you are and where the blade is and what the wood is doing, this can be a pretty safe tool to use. But like I said, this isn't a video on table saw tips. It's a review. But that is what I think about table saw safety, is you just gotta be careful, because it is a saw. Like with all saws, it cuts stuff. So anyway, this is a re-edit. If you've already watched this video and you're wondering why it's come up again, that is why. Thank you for coming back. But the review after this is identical. You don't really need to watch it. Unless you want to watch it again, of course. If you're new here, then I hope you enjoy the review. This is 15mm plywood, and I'm cutting it on a 45-degree angle. Hello and welcome to my workshop. Today's review is on the Bosch Professional GTS 635-216 table saw. So this is their smallest table saw. They have some bigger ones that have a 10-inch or 254mm blade. This is an 8¼ or 216mm blade. So it's 1600 watt, 5500 RPM. You can cut up to just above 70mm deep with it, maybe a bit more, but it's rated for 70mm on 90. I think it's only rated for 50mm or something on a 45-degree angle, so you can bevel it up to 45 degrees to the left. On the right of the blade, you can cut a rip just under 64 centimeters. So it's 1600 watt, 5500 RPM. The blade has to be a table saw blade. I did try putting a drop saw blade in it, but the drop saw blade is too thin for the riving knife. You could use a drop saw blade if you needed to just cut some small stuff and it's all you had, but it's definitely ideal to have the proper table saw blade in it. I'll demonstrate that later in the video. So I got mine with the stand. It came all in one kit, but you can buy them separate if you want to make your own stand, or if you only wanted the saw, or if you already had the stand or whatever. But before I get into what I think of this saw, I'm going to show you all the features. So it does have an aluminum housing. The tabletop is aluminum, and the fence and everything is aluminum. This blue housing is plastic, although this is aluminum here. The switch is right here, so it's on, and then you just press that when you want off. And it does have a lock on it, so you can lock it off if you want it, and you can even put a padlock on it. So the cord isn't really long, but it's long enough, and it's a nice cord. It's the rubber type rather than the hard plastic type. So you have a carrying handle here, which is actually a pretty good carrying handle. It's pretty thick plastic. So then to bevel it, you just pull this red one like that, and then you can slide it to 45 or 22.5 or whatever you wanted. You can just lock it like that. And then this is your blade up and down. So that puts the blade up and down. This is your push stick. It's kind of nice how it's just tucked away in the front here, because then if you're cutting something and you need to push stick, you just reach down and pull it out rather than having it rattle around on the tabletop or something. So it does clip in, but if you're using it, you can just place it there. It doesn't need to be clipped in. This is the lever for extending your table. So you just flip it up and you can extend your table, which I'll demonstrate in a minute. And then on the side here you have all your accessory storage. So this is your blade guard. That's an Allen key for something, not sure. I've never had to use that Allen key. This is your blade changing tool. And then this is for taking the guard around the blade off. That's for assembling your table or a stand, and I'm not sure what that is for, but probably for something. So it just clips in there. Then down here, this is your miter guide. So it's a plastic guide, and it's not really long, but I've never had to use it, and I don't really think I would use it. So for the 1 or 2 times I may use this guide, the plastic one is alright. But if you use it all the time, it is a plastic one, so it's not a metal one. But it does slide in the rails quite well. And it just clips in back there and is all neatly tucked away. So then to take this off, you just lift it. It comes off like that. And to put it back on, you just put it on like that. It's kind of nice how everything just sort of is tucked away in here for transportation. And then you can also flip the fence upside down and have it under here when you're transporting it. So now I'm going to show you the tabletop. So this is your tabletop. Like I said, it's an aluminum tabletop. You have a carrying handle here, and not on the edge, so it's here and here. So your miter guide is pretty tight fitting, and it doesn't really wobble. It wobbles a tiny bit, but I don't think that the amount of wobble that this miter guide has is anything to worry about. I'll just put that away. So then to move your fence, just lift up like that. It is not a rack and pinion fence, so if you have to have a rack and pinion fence, this saw isn't for you. However, I don't really mind because it's still a good fence and it's accurate. Like I'll demonstrate later in the video, it is pretty much 100% accurate. So when you're using one of these fences, it is a good idea to be gentle and to kind of push it on both ends rather than just yanking it. So you kind of just want to slide it gently, and then just make sure that it is pushed on properly there before you lock it on. So then your blade can come up. It has to come up to hook the guard on. I always use the guard, although I had the guard off because I was making I was cutting some cuts that I wasn't going to be cutting all the way through the wood, so I had to take the guard off because the blade wasn't going through all the way through the wood. However, it is really simple just to put your guard on. Just do that, and your guard is on. You can clip your guard up like that if you want. Both sides are individual. So then, the riving knife does have two positions. See, you just turn that to take this out. This is aluminum, and it is a metal clip that holds it in. This is your blade lock right here. So that's how you change the blade, like I'll demonstrate later. So to change the riving knife position, it is easiest to have it all the way up. Let me just zoom in on this. So you just pull this lever up, and then it has two indents in it, so you want to put the indents in, then you just lock it back in place. So in here, this is aluminum, and the rest is hard nylon, I guess, although the motor side is aluminum. Then you just put that back in. I would recommend always locking it in place. And this way, your guard is above the top of the blade. I'll just show you here. So if you're cutting 10mm plywood, you can just have it 10mm above the table rather than having to have an extra 3 centimeters or whatever with a riving knife in the lower position. So on the riving knife here, you can see the blade is a 216mm blade, and the teeth have to be more than 2.3 millimeters. And the thickness of the blade has to be less than 2.1 millimeters. This one is a 22 tooth blade, and the dimensions I can't see on it, but I'll mention the dimensions later. To extend your table, if you want to be cutting more than 29 centimeters to the right, you have to unlock this first. Then you unlock this. Now, when you extend the table this way, it is a bit trickier than when you're just moving the fence. So you just move it. It is a bit sticky, but that might very well be because I have not used it much yet, because I don't really rip wide things. So then you just lock it in place, and then your fence. Then you can just lock your fence in. So it's a pretty simple system. It's probably not as easy as a rack and pinion, but it's still pretty simple. And then your fence just comes off like that. This is what it looks like underneath. So it's a heavy aluminum fence. And this, yeah, that part is aluminum. However, these parts are plastic. Although, if they ever wear out, it's really no big deal because you can order the parts directly from Bosch. I had to order some parts for my miter saw the other day. I ordered them on Wednesday and they were here Friday morning, so is pretty quick to get parts directly from Bosch. And then this part of the fence, you can take off and extend the fence. So you can turn the fence around like this. So if you want to get really close to the blade, this is what you do. And it's just 2 wing nuts on the other side. It's a bit tricky, but it's not hard to do. So then dust extraction. For the first little while I had this saw, I just had a 90-degree plumbing piece in the dust port here, and it was just shooting into a bucket. But all the little dust particles blew around and it was really dusty. You basically had to wear a mask just to cut a piece of plywood. Whereas with the vacuum, there is no dust. There's a bit of big chunks that get on the floor, but all the little particles go in the vacuum. So I have my Karcher MV2 under there. It's dedicated to this saw now, at least for the moment. And I have a 45 degree plumbing part and just a piece of brass. There's a piece of brass holding it in. I drilled a hole through the plumbing pipe. So a piece of brass, the vacuum fits in the plumbing pipe, and then the vacuum sits underneath. So that way all the dust goes in the vacuum except some big chunks that come off the top. But it's a lot cleaner that way and a lot easier to breathe while you're using this saw. So I definitely recommend putting a vacuum if you're going to be cutting quite a bit of wood, or if you set this saw up in the corner of your shop or something like I have. I definitely recommend just putting a vacuum under it. And the vacuum, it's always under there. I have a power bar, so I just plug the power bar in, and the vacuum and the saw, I use them at the same time. So it's always set up and always ready to go, so I'm never like, I'm just going to do one cut, and so I just cut it without the vacuum. I always have the vacuum there. So this is the factory blade in it. I'm just going to see if I can put a standard 216mm drop saw blade in it. This is the old drop saw blade that I have. I'm going to see if it will fit in this saw. Remember when changing blades that you want to unplug the saw first. So the standard drop saw blade fits in this saw. As you can see, it only took about 3 minutes to change the blade, so pretty easy. This is the blade that I've been using. It's the factory blade, 22 tooth. It is 70.6. Well, that's what it is at this end. That's what it is at this end. So about 0.2mm off, which I think is pretty decent. So I've got the table extended. What I want to do is see how accurate it is when it's extended. So from this end to here is about 68.5. Yeah, 68.5. So it's 68.6, so it's off by less than a millimeter. I want to see it fully extended. So this is presumably 64. Between, yeah, 64. So 92.6. 92.7, so it's off by a millimeter or two, which At that distance is probably okay. So the saw does have a soft start. I'm not sure what the soft start is for. I think it's so that it's softer on your bearings and gears and motor, I guess. I'm not the biggest fan of the soft start, especially on the drop saw. I would much prefer it to just go 0 to 100% when you pull the trigger or flick it on. But it has a soft start. This is what it sounds like. So, no big deal, but it does have a soft start. So, the power-wise on this saw, like the actual power that it puts out, like it's a 1600 watt motor, and it's the same motor as what's on my drop saw. But, power-wise, I'd say it has pretty good power, like doing 10 mil, 15 mil plywood, it has no problem doing that. You can do it all the time. Even 15 mil plywood on a 45 degree angle is okay. Decking lumber, that kind of stuff, like thin boards, no problem. I have done quite a bit of ripping 40 by 60, so 4 centimeters of wood. Again, it struggles a little bit on the 40 by 60s, but it still can do it. So 4 centimeters of wood is, I'm not sure if more than that would be too much, but 4 centimeters of wood is totally fine. As you saw at the beginning of the video, I was cutting some beech that was about 4.5 centimeters, 45 millimeters thick, and actually it cut the 45 millimeter thick beech a lot easier than it cut the 40 millimeter thick pine, which is probably because the beech is drier, whereas the pine has got a lot more sap and stuff in it. But so power wise, I'm happy with it. I think it's definitely got enough power for anything that I'd ever want to do, and like it is the smaller model of their table saws, so it's not necessarily the biggest saw out there, is what I'm trying to say. So I'd say for a smaller, more compact table saw, it has totally enough power. The speed doesn't really matter, but again, I'd say it has a good speed. It cuts really fast. Now, part of that might be because of a sharp blade, but it cuts fast, and the blade is the factory blade. I've never put a new blade in it, and so a year later, and I've done quite a bit of cutting on it, and I'd say it's still pretty sharp. It's not as sharp as it was when it was brand new, but it's still pretty sharp. It still can cut through 40 by 60s no problem. So it is a 216 blade with a 30 millimeter hole in the center, as you will see in a minute, or have seen, I'm not sure. I did try to put a drop saw blade in it, and it does fit. The only thing is that the drop saw blade is too thin, so the riving knife is thicker than the drop saw blade. So it would really only work in an emergency when you don't have any other blades, or if you're cutting 10 mil plywood or something that's going to split apart really easily. So precision, again, as you will see or has seen, I'm not sure which it is. It is exact on, maybe half a millimeter off, and the further out you go, it might be a millimeter off, but it is pretty much as perfect as it needs to be. It's more accurate than anything I could do freehand with a circular saw, let me put you that way. Now, vibration, I don't think it really has much vibration. I'd actually say that this saw is pretty smooth. Compared to how rough it could be, I'd say this is pretty smooth. It is loud, but it's a table saw, so it doesn't really bother me. I always wear my earplugs when I'm working anyway, so that doesn't matter. I like the build quality on it. I think it is built well enough. It's not as robust as it could be, but it does have an aluminum structure and an aluminum tabletop, and some pretty decent carrying handles, so that's good enough for me. The housing, like the blue housing, that is plastic, but it is still actually pretty strong plastic. I'm not sure what kind of plastic it is, but it's pretty strong. Like, you'd have to be pretty rough on it to break it. So, build quality, I'm happy. The dust extraction, it would be nice if Bosch would consider, and pretty much tool companies in general, would consider putting dust ports on their tools that will actually fit a standard vacuum hose. Because pretty much all the tools I have that have a dust port, you can't put a standard vacuum hose on it. You have to have an adapter, which half the time the adapter doesn't even exist, so that's a bit annoying. But luckily this one, I just put the piece of plumbing pipe on it, and the vacuum hose fits in that. So when you do have the vacuum on it, the dust, there's very little dust. You see a lot of dust on it. Part of that is because I've been planing and sanding in here, and the dust settles on it, so it doesn't spew too much dust. And the dust that does spew is the big chunks that fall on the floor anyway, so all the little particles go in the vacuum if you have the vacuum on it. I'd say it's pretty easy to use. Alright, extending the table isn't the easiest thing to do in the world, but once you get the hang of it, it's straightforward, it's not hard. Putting the blade up and down, that's easy. Beveling it, that's easy. Changing the riving knife, it's all easy. And it's nice that all the accessories and stuff can be packed away on the other end there, so that if you're transporting it, it's all just packed up. Because I think the purpose of this saw is to be more of a mobile saw because it's smaller. And actually, I'd say, I think the depth capacity on the 10-inch saw, or 254mm, is 90 millimeters, whereas this is 70mm, so it still has some really good depth capacity for its blade size. And also, the table is 63.5 centimeters to the right, so you can rip a sheet of plywood down the center if you want, because a sheet of plywood is about 1.25 meters, so half of that would be 62.5, so you have an extra centimeter just because, why not? So you can rip plywood on it, and it definitely does have the power to rip a sheet of plywood, like a 2.5 meter long sheet of plywood down the center. You would need 2 people though, I think, just because it's easier that way. But yeah, it does have the capacity to do that. So I'd say capacity is big enough for me. Like, for what I want to do with this saw and what I do with it, this saw is perfect. I don't need to have the bigger saw that would be a lot bigger. So I do like this saw. I'd say it's about as good as the drop saw that I have, which we've been using that for 4 years now, and it's still going strong. But we're not, me and my dad are not new to Bosch. We've been using Bosch forever. My dad has a Bosch circular saw that is 10 years old, so I think the Bosch Professional is pretty good. I'd say it's about the same as a DeWalt, maybe even a Makita sometimes. But definitely stay away from the green Bosch. That's just a little tip. So yeah, you do have something I forgot to mention, you do have two tracks for your miter gauge. So you can go on either side of the blade if you want. So overall, I'd say it's a good saw. The other thing that I noticed when I was purchasing this saw is, as a kit with the sand and the saw, it was only half the price of the bigger one, the 10-inch. So that's kind of why I chose this saw, because really the capacities on the 10-inch weren't anything that I really needed to spend double the price on. Although my dad did have the 10-inch in Canada, and it was a really nice saw. So if you want the capacities of the bigger ones, I'd definitely say that the 10-inch is just as valuable as this one. But I actually like having, even if I bought the 10-inch, I'd probably still buy this one just because this one's a lot smaller and a lot lighter, so this one's a lot easier to transport. I do have a video on the stand. I'll link that in the description. So thank you for watching. Please check out my Patreon account. Link is in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. And let me know in the comments what you think of this saw, and also what you think of this video.